What a wonderful feeling it was to own your own car.
In the beginning of the 20th century, the automobile became available to the average American consumer for the first time in history. Immediately, Americans developed a long-lasting love affair with the automobile and recreational travel. As more and more travelers took to the road, they needed places to eat, rest, and fill her up along the way. Family-owned service stations, tourist cabins, and restaurants began to appear. Undeniably, the way we traveled began to shape how the American roadside looked through our windshields. But by the 1940s, the number of cars on American roads continued to grow. With so many motorists, the roadways soon became cumbersome to travel. Engineers looked to build superhighways to carry millions of motorists quickly and efficiently from place to place. Once the superhighways were constructed, roads like Route 20 and Route 9 became known as the Slowway and were no longer desirable.
Whether going east or west, you drive without interruption or delay. Over this finely engineered highway, the finest engineered cars carry millions of people bound on business, travel, or vacation.
Businesses and communities along these abandoned routes struggled to modernize and to attract the number of tourists they once relied upon to support them, but most remained unsuccessful. For today's newest generation of travelers, the windshield becomes a window into the past. From your car, you cannot help but notice the abandoned tourist cabins, shuttered service stations, formerly thriving theme parks, and even those persistent businesses that still remain in operation today. And then you are left to wonder, how did we get here? What will the future of travel hold for these forgotten routes? Will we ever see these roadside ruins preserved? And this is where we begin to look closely into the rich histories of New York State's Route 20 and Route 9 for some answers. Longer than Route 66, yet lesser known, U.S. Route 20 is the longest highway in the United States, connecting Newport, Oregon to Boston, Massachusetts. During its heyday in the 1930s and 40s, it was lined with numerous roadside amenities in New York State that welcomed carloads of traveling families. The route was first officially established in 1799 as the Great Western or Cherry Valley Turnpike. It was the main commercial transportation route prior to the railway and canal systems. After the Erie Canal was completed in 1825, travel on the turnpike dramatically lessened until the tourism boom of the early 20th century. During this time, state and federal governments were investing more and more money into the construction and maintenance of road systems to meet the demands of the growing number of travelers on the roads. When the New York State Thruway was constructed in 1954, the thriving tourism industry along Route 20 suffered as travelers began bypassing the route altogether. Today, a number of historic icons related to Route 20's tourism industry still remain, while the future of travel on 20 is currently being debated.
When you drive down Route 20, you can't help but notice the abandoned buildings, and most of them obviously were cabins of some sort. It's sad to look at that and see it in such a state, knowing that, again, it was a place that, someone built with pride, owned with pride, and ran a business.
My parents moved here in 1946, and then my dad was a mechanic for a Buick dealership, and then he wanted to start his own business. They decided to move upstate New York, so they came up Route 20 and stopped here in a little town of Duanesburg, and my parents bought a small little shack, which was originally cabins and just a little lunchroom arrangement. And then my dad built his service station. They named it Kathy's. It was named after my sister. And I remember a lot of people would come here and have home cooked meals, and they would rent a cabin for like maybe 3 days or something like that. And they would leave after they had breakfast at the restaurant, and they would go to Howe Caverns, or they would go to the TP, or they would visit some place around this area, in Schoharie and Cobleskill or whatever. And then they would come back at night and have dinner again. And I remember them sitting on the porch, with the little metal chairs and just absorbing the evening.
The most well-preserved and well-documented cabin court along Route 20 in New York is the Commodore. In fact, it is often referred to as the Queen of Cabin Courts. It was built in the 1930s by U.S. LaValle, and in 1938 survived a move to a new location along the new Route 20 in Sharon, New York. Today, the Commodore cabins have received a fresh coat of paint and are being reused as storage facilities. Because they have been so well maintained, it's easy to picture them welcoming travelers for overnight accommodations as you pass them in your car.
Every afternoon by 4 o'clock, we were full. People came. In fact, I still write to the daughter of a family who came every single summer.
Route 20 was the main highway to America, before the thruway came in. And of course, that was a devastation too. And then that pretty much turned the Great Western Turnpike into, basically just a back road, and a lot of businesses were devastated by it, including my parents.
The cabins were, very popular until the thruway came through. And there were some motel units that started to be built of a traditional style where you had, a central office with wings on both sides and connected long buildings.
I think at any period of time, people are presenting what they think is the newest. I mean, it's always modern times. So the little cabins of the mid-20s to the 30s, even before World War II, were the state of the art, by and large. And it's important to remember these cabins weren't meant for long stays. These were overnight and keep going. I think as people traveled more elsewhere in the state, elsewhere in the country, as family size grew, as our travel became, a family trip, expecting a swimming pool at the end of the day, expecting, a proper sit-down restaurant. Tourist cabins, to keep up, had to adapt that way.
He had built 2 sections of motels. In fact, he had taken some of the double-wide cabins that he had made originally back in probably 1955, and then about 1960 he slid those cabins together and then added an addition onto that and made the one hotel unit that he had. He put brick fronts and he put the ceramic baths with the inside plumbing and everything else, and ceramic was very popular back then. It was state-of-the-art in the early 50s. He had eventually hooked up TVs into all the rooms, which was a big plus. I remember the big TV sign, underneath the cabins and motel, and we saw TV and running water. I mean, wow, that was a Taj Mahal. That was a place to stop.
Even with these strong efforts to modernize the cabins and handmade motels on Route 20, they still fell out of favor with travelers. The majority of those that remain in business today are rented as low-income or transient housing.
Families nowadays are used to a high level of comfort. The cars that they're making nowadays, they have DVD players in them because kids can't entertain themselves. They can't read a book or play a game in the back seat with their siblings, or just amuse themselves in a car for any length of time. And people going to the grocery store, the kids will watch a DVD.
People really, they stop to smell the roses, so to speak, and they just don't seem to do that anymore.
I think as people traveled, and this might be as much by train as by automobile in the 20th century, and then as airline travel became not only affordable, but the next new shiny thing that a family could do together. I mean, the glamour of airline travel in the 50s and 60s can't be beat. Opportunities opened up beyond Route 20 and outside of our state, and that became the family vacation. If you had the money, you could do that new thing in California, Disneyland or Pacific Ocean Park or whatever the other real draws were, and not just go to that attraction maybe 50 or 100 miles up the road, regardless of whether it was, the land of make-believe or Frontier Town in New York State.
Frontier Town was a Wild West theme park that opened in 1952 along Route 9 in North Hudson, New York. It was one of several popular Adirondack area theme parks that remained in operation until 1998. It remains yet another example of the changing demands and tastes of American travelers as they planned their vacations during the second half of the 20th century. With so many other choices of theme parks and tourist destinations becoming available to travelers, and Americans' abilities to travel further distances in shorter periods of time, Frontier Town too fell out of favor with vacationers, just as the cabins, motels, and small businesses did along Route 20.
That's where I actually started working. I lived in Mariah, approximately about 20 miles away. At that time, Mariah was a mining town. It closed in 1971. My dad worked in the mines for 32 years, and Frontier Town at that particular time, which was started in 1952, was actually employing close to 300 employees in our area.
I've lived here for about 20 years. Before that, I was north of here some, but I was always in this area. But from what I hear of the locals that work there, and the Canadians it drew a lot of Canadians over the years, and families from downstate, Albany, as far as ways New York and Connecticut, and throughout New England, in the 60s when everybody took to the highway and went out with their families and their station wagons and stuff. Like I say, it started out immediately, drawing thousands of people a day into it, and it was a big attraction for well into the 70s.
Don't forget, Montreal is less than 2 hours from us here, and if it were a U.S. city, it would be the 10th largest U.S. city. So it's obvious that we would pull an awful lot, from that area. And that's one of the bigger things that hurt Frontier Town over the years, was the exchange being so unfavorable that it wasn't that, there was some kind of a holdup. They just stopped coming.
Originally, you had the North Pole, Frontier Town, and it was great for motorists going by to stop at all these Adirondack attractions and put these bumper stickers on. And they'd have like 4 or 5, whatever, and it's kind of ironic because sometimes they'd put them over their radiator and they'd be heating up the car, and that dumb take it off, it's not going to work. But in 1972, if you recall, that was a gas crunch, and we had a shortage of gas here in America, and that really began to hurt Frontier Town.
A lot of people around here would say that maybe when they put the Adirondack Northway in, it hurt Frontier Town. I don't agree with that. I think that since they built the new A-frame, and it's visible off the interstate, and that was the entrance to the park, I think that the I-87 coming in could have benefited them. People, it was just a short drive out of Albany now, an hour and a half, and they were here. In the old days on Route 9, it was a 3-hour drive from Albany up, bumper-to-bumper traffic up Route 9. I know when I grew up, when I was a kid, there was a lot of westerns on TV, and all us kids run around with cap guns, and the cowboys and Indian was big. But like I say, back in the mid-'70s, I think that was kind of taken over by the Star Wars thing, and that all changed. The kids just weren't into that kind of thing so much anymore, I believe. The fellow that took over in the mid-'80s had some good ideas, and he would have liked to made changes to try to modernize and get people's attention today and keep them coming, but he didn't have the money behind him that it needed to, because these are very expensive changes that had to be made, and to add on these attractions was going to cost millions of dollars, and he just didn't have the money behind him to do it. He took partners in. That didn't work out very well. I think if somebody would have come in there with his ideas and had the money behind him, I think that he could have made the changes it would have took to keep that a place that people would still want to go to today.
When I was a kid, you went to the Jersey Shore or you went to the mountains. Today things are worldwide. So as things turned down, and the population as far as tourists became less and less in this area, our prices or our dollars to stay open, insurances, our fixed expenses were rising. You have to have an awful lot of luck.
I think that most of these small businesses up and down Route 9 back then were part of the support system of Frontier Town. I mean, the people that drove here needed places to stay with their families. They needed to gas up on the way in before they left. They needed places to eat, to stay, and this was all a spinoff of Frontier Town being here. And once Frontier Town got done, then they one by one have gone out of business over the years. And right now in North Hudson, there's not but a handful of small businesses. Like in years ago, there was 35, 40 good, strong businesses in this town, and which made a lot of work for the local people. But it's just not here anymore.
Hopefully, we'll see something, new owner, and of course, maybe a Cabela's, maybe a Bass Pro Shop. Who knows? That could come in and revitalize the area.
You know, at some point in time, people are going to miss this, and they're going to want to have it back. And I'd like to see it. I would like to see it be tried again by somebody, maybe the county, maybe some business folks out of New York. But I do believe it can make it, and it should make it. It's what this country was built on.
It would seem that Routes 20 and 9 have a number of options for marketing and preservation available to them. Beginning in 1926, organizations like the Cherry Valley Turnpike Association were established to promote tourism along Route 20 in New York State. Today we see the efforts of the Route 20 Association and Otsego 2000, who have successfully achieved a scenic byway designation in 2004. This was made possible with the assistance of the Preservation League of New York. The Society for Commercial Archaeology is also a resource that works to preserve America's roadside architecture. But at this point, the local efforts are in their early stages, and the sites along 20 and 9 remain vulnerable.
The idea of rehabilitating some of the cabins and making them into places that people could stay at, currently, unfortunately, I think is a little bit too optimistic.
I think it's a lot tougher to deal with vacant buildings, and tougher still when they're really small vacant buildings that were built for seasonal use. Those really do present some challenges for people just conceptualizing how to do a preservation strategy for them. Some buildings are preserved as museums, and it doesn't mean that there's something going on in them every minute, simply that they're left open. And we have a few cases in New York State where buildings have been moved from one place and made into a collection of buildings. Certainly, the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown is exactly that. I've never seen that done, at least not in New York State, for 20th century automobile architecture, but it's not impossible to imagine that that could happen.
In my village, the Canal Street station that I've erected, I've had a very deep desire to gather up a few cabins that are along Route 20. Unfortunately, the ones that were here were dismantled and destroyed. But there's a lot of really neat cabins that don't require big moving effort. It would be a typical roadside village in a little town that would have some cabins in it, and in the cabins I would probably name Kathy's Cabins. I would consider doing that, as an attraction, and people could stay there, for hardly anything, just to give you that atmosphere of what it was like.
The possibility for commercial development also seems likely along 20, most recently with the introduction of a Walmart distribution center just outside of historic Sharon Springs, New York. It will be interesting to watch how these communities plan for their future while still working to preserve their heritage.
I think attractions on 20, on 9, on any of the older roads that had major automobile travel, experienced major automobile travel since the advent of the automobile, will continue to need to look at what their niche markets are, and I think it's multiple markets. They can't really just rely on one, nor have they ever. But the niche markets might be really looking at these 1930s to 60s to 70s buildings and see them as assets instead of liabilities. I mean, small kids will still be attracted to these places. I'd like to think that there's enough of a baby boomer generation that has very positive associations with some of these places, and would be very sad to see them all disappear. I don't have any illusions that they all will remain. and be the subjects of reinvestment, but I'd like to think that some of them will remain and be invested in again and again so they can continue to serve and delight the next generation.
In some areas, travel on the thruway has become the inconvenience it once was on New York's two-lane highways, and the pace of travel only continues to accelerate. Will the superhighways of tomorrow become the superhighways of yesterday?
Firebird 2 to Control Tower. We are about to take off on the highway of tomorrow. Stand by.
How will future developments in transportation affect the future of tourism? And finally, is it possible to modernize routes 20 and 9 to revitalize them, or will we lose all that we value about their histories in the process?